Welcome to Rainbow Records, a show about the stories of queer people who lived through the AIDS crisis in Los Angeles. Stories of resistance, resilience, and a community that refused to be erased. I'm your host, Analisa Venolia. This episode, our guests are artists Tom Keegan and Davidson Lloyd. Tom and Davidson, also known as Keegan and LLoyd, got together in 1977 and have been partners ever since. They have created award-winning pieces and were at the forefront of the fight for marriage equality. While their story began in New York, they moved to Los Angeles towards the end of the 80s. They shared what their lives were like as a committed gay couple and as artists during the AIDS crisis. So, let's get right to it.
My name is Tom Keegan, and I am a performance director for video games. I'm also an author and a teacher. And I was born in New York City, and I grew up in the greater New York area.
I'm Davidson Lloyd. I am a performance artist, a writer, a poet. I was born in Texas, but basically grew up in Manhattan.
When did you first know that you were gay?
I had inklings of being gay when I was kind of pre-adolescent, right? Like 10 to 13. And I remember at that time that it was just a horrifying thought that I just thought I'd end up like an old man in a bus station toilet, cruising there. I couldn't see any, respectable life for myself. But when I got older, when I was in high school, I was in a theater troupe, and there were a couple of gay people in that. And when I went to college, when I went to drama school, everybody was queer, and then I came out, and I kind of came out to my mother as bisexual when I was in college. And after college, I just decided I'm gay. And then I had a steady boyfriend soon after that, Davidson Lloyd.
Well, that's a really good question. And the thing is, I came out basically being gay when I met Tom Keegan. I want to say, and I believe strong, it was love at first sight. And it continues to be love at first sight all these years later.
How did you two meet? And how did you get together?
Well, we have a little bit of a difference of opinion
We do.
about it, because I say that we met at the audition. And this was right around the time that my mom and my stepfather, John, got together. And in fact, the audition for this place, The Yard, was happening in New York. And I briefly was living in Boston, working with some people that I'm still friends with today, some dance theater stuff in Boston. And I came down to New York, and the audition for this summer place, The Yard, happened to be the same weekend that my family was having this sort of like meet the other family weekend. So it's one of those times in life I call the page turns. And we got to this loft in Soho really early in the morning, and everybody was there. It was mostly young women dancers, a couple of men, and I was more in the dance theater part of it. And everyone was sort of stretching and breathing, and all of a sudden somebody yawned. Like there was this big yawn that's like, oh, and all these dancers kind of went, ah, and this person popped up their head and they said, yawning, it's very good, it opens the throat. And I just thought in my head, I got to meet that guy. And he led the theater part, and so I was very excited. I went up to talk to him at the end of the thing, and I said, oh, I'm an actor too, and I love what you're doing, and blah, blah, blah. And we had this whole conversation, and he was looking to the right, and he was looking to the left, and he never looked at me the whole time. But when I got the gig, I remember thinking, I wonder if that guy's going to be there, and I hope so.
And Davidson, what's your side of the story?
Well, the story was, that audition, like I said, I had worked with a group called the Medicine Show Theater Ensemble for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, I said, the dream is over. So I announced to them at the end of the production we're doing, I'm leaving. Well, the two artistic directors did not take it well. One of them only spoke to me on stage during performance. The other one only spoke to me to give me directions on stage for the performance. So that audition day, that night was the last performance. So that's where my mind was. Could I hold myself together for this last performance and end this thing? And then when I went to the Vineyard, this is the way I describe it, because it was, I was at the top of the stairs and he was at the bottom of the stairs, and something happened.
Yeah, he was like, it was like, in the movies when the saxophone plays, I looked up and he looked down and was like, well, hello, and it was like, then he saw me, and then we had this kind of romance. This was in 77. We took it slow, meaning we didn't have sex for a week. And that was like, let's not jump into anything.
There's a facility in New York called Manhattan Plaza for artists. The week that it opened,
housing project.
it's a housing. It's a what is it? Something 8?
Section 8.
Section 8, and it was 85% performers, and then 10% people connected to the business, ticket takers, people like that, and 10% people that had been displaced when these 2 towers were put up in Chelsea Clinton. I got very involved. I moved in the first week it opened. And by the end of the week, they had 5,000 applications. And so I had this great apartment, and I said to Tom,
We met, he had just moved in a
Yeah.
week before when we met, when he came up to the Vineyard. And so we had this hot romance. And I was like, okay, I'm moving back to New York. Also, I made all these connections here, and I feel like I could, have a professional life. He says, and rightly so, that he was like, you'll come and live with me. And I was sort of took it like, I'll stay with you till I find my own place, because I didn't know if it was going to work out.
but as I say, he moved in with his Joni Mitchell, Judy Collins, Bette Midler albums and never moved out.
My family has always been very much in the picture as part of my life. Davidson's family was really, we weren't really connected with them for many years, the first 12 years maybe of our relationship. But Davidson was like an outsider boyfriend. Like the first Christmas that we were together, we took family photos and he kind of stood off to the side. And it took about really 10 years for him to be fully accepted into the family. My parents were divorced, and my mother married a wonderful guy. There were 5 kids in my family, and she married a wonderful guy who had 4 kids. And so we had this big put-together family, and we were mostly grown up by then. When our parents had been together 10 years, we hosted just a family get-together in the Hamptons. We were living in New York at the time, and we just put on the dog. I mean, we got these houses organized, we cooked the meals, we worked our butts off, and it was that, we try harder mentality that many gay people have. And at the end of it, our parents were like, okay, you're in, right? Like they couldn't keep us as outsiders any longer, but it took a lot of work.
What led you to begin creating performance art?
My background, my first professional job was in dinner theaters in the South. And I've been on Broadway, I've been off Broadway, I've been off Broadway. And then I got involved with people that were creating work from the body of the group. And I liked that idea because it was a lot a lot of improvisation, and then putting together a piece, a story. And I did that with a number of groups. There was a group called the Medicine Show Theater Ensemble, which I spent 3 years doing. And it seemed like when Tom and I got together that performance art for the two of us is something that we really understood and could do together.
Tim Miller and John Byrne were sort of role models for us. They did some pieces together, and I was part of that scene, the East Village open movement scene, along with Ellie Covan, who went on to found Dixon Place. And Tim Miller, I went over to his apartment, and he had a calendar there, and he was like, okay, when do you want to do something? But also before that, at this same place where we met, the Yard, there was opportunities to do more kind of movement-based or dance theater type stuff. There was room for the performers to try out some stuff if they wanted to. I was a drama major in college, but I switched over to directing, and I created a couple of original theater pieces in college.
Describe for me how you began creating art together.
I'm not sure. We were together. It was like, well, what shall we do? And let's create a piece.
So we were in this company called Nimbus. It was sort of a dance theater company that there were several choreographers, and there was some theater and movement together. And I think that was, we had an opportunity to create a piece on a program. And so
Yeah.
we made this piece called Continental Drift. You know, was what was happening at the time. It was not so expensive to be living in New York. You could rent spaces cheaply. There were grants for stuff. And so that's why a lot of what was going on in the 80s and the late 70s and the 80s in New York was very seminal. We did this piece called Continental Drift. And then after I got kind of involved at PS 122 and I saw what John and Tim were doing, I was like, let's do a piece. We can do a piece about our relationship. And we did this piece called I'll Love You Forever.
Or at least until Friday.
It was like a movement. It was visuals. It was fruit. It was spray paint. You know, we were kind of part of this community. We did it at PS 122.
I think the reason that we titled it I'll Love You Forever, or at least until Friday, because during that time, and this was before AIDS, there was the warm impermanence of male relationships. And, you have a boyfriend one day and you break up the next day. And we were trying to sort of say that from the very beginning, that two men can be together and have a life, have a good life.
Describe what your life was like in the time before AIDS was discovered in the U.S. Tell me about your life as young gay artists.
We weren't on the forefront of gay liberation. That already had started. So we were sort of standing on the shoulders of the early gay liberationists, right? And we were in the theater and dance world where it was very safe. And with places like PS 122, all the lofts in Soho, space was available. And, having a space is something that for performing artists means everything. We didn't have anything like TikTok or YouTube. We didn't have the kinds of media tools that people have now. We had our bodies and we had space. In the early years, we used to say, like, it was very safe at PS 122, and we had a loving audience. Outside of there, we called it sex education. When we would tour, not in London, we did some stuff in London, and that was very receptive as well. But if we would tour somewhere, we'd always feel like, okay, the queers are coming out. The actual queers are coming out, and the audience would sort of gasp when we came out, and we'd sort of go like, it's sex education, man. We're just giving them, we're just being ourselves.
And we sort of had this kind of mantra. Before we went on stage, we would say, basically, to ourselves and to the audience that was waiting, we'd say, we're here, we're queer. Now, will you go on a journey with us? There were two things that Tom and I were always promoting, was coupledom and marriage. And we did that from the very beginning. And in the gay community, gay men and lesbians, they didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to know about couples. They didn't want to know about marriage.
It wasn't as cool. It really
Yeah.
was not as cool. But that was always our thing, right? Like, hey, we're a couple. We're a committed couple. Maybe someday we could get married. It seemed like a far off pipe dream.
Yeah.
But it was reflective of our lives. We felt that if we just came on stage and normalized our lives and the lives of people around us and the stories that we told about the people in our lives, those stories were authentic and they could be theater. And by coming on stage with a kind of authenticity and physicality, we would just normalize we were visible. We made our life visible. At times it was very challenging.
Tell me about your initial reactions to AIDS.
Well, in our piece, I'll Love You Forever, we made fun of AIDS because it seemed at that time like there was,
What do you mean we made fun of
we
it?
had a joke about it. It was called GRID. We had a joke about it. Like it was another thing they were trying to pin on us. It was a gloom and doom thing that, the queer dies in the third act. It seemed like something far away that, was in the press. It was this thing we read about. And then it began to hit home. But it always was something like, it's another thing they have against us. It's another strike against us. We've been swimming upstream for so long, we're not going to take this laying down.
I mean, I was in the room when Kramer, what was his first name? Larry Kramer?
Yeah.
And this was a meeting about AIDS and what we were going to do about it. And he stood up and screamed, "It's a plague." We were all in a rage. And I suppose that's when we all took to the streets.
This is just part one of the conversation with Tom Keegan and Davidson Lloyd. In the next part, you'll hear them discuss their experiences during the height of the AIDS epidemic and their life in LA. This has been Rainbow Records. Until next time.